Meet Joanna Penn, creator of the 10 million download Creative Penn podcast, reaching listeners across 200 countries. In this episode, she reveals her blueprint for turning a podcast into a thriving business. Discover proven strategies for building an engaged audience, creating valuable content, and generating multiple revenue streams. Joanna shares practical lessons learned through 14 years of podcasting that will elevate your show's success. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan William. Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to this episode of the Podcasting Secrets Show. Today, I am joined by Joanna Penn. She is the host of the Creative Penn podcast, where she has had more than 10 million downloads for more than 200 countries. She's an author of more than 40 books across multiple different genres. And today we're going to talk about 7 lessons that she's learned from those 10 million downloads. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joanna.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show, Nathan.
Can you start off by just sharing with us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm English. People might hear from my accent. I live in Bath in the southwest, where we have a 2,000-year-old Roman baths. So that's where the name comes from. And as you said, I've been writing for a long time now. 2006, I started. And before that, I used to implement financial systems into large corporates. So for anyone who thinks they're not creative, you can actually be, as you call them, an incurable creative, even if you start out in corporate. So yeah, I'm a full-time writer and podcaster.
Yeah, my daughter is going to be so jealous about this. She's an aspiring writer and she wants to do what you've achieved. It's a tough jump from being an aspiring author to being able to provide for yourself as an author. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming a successful author and host?
Yeah, well, to be fair, my podcast goes hand in hand really with the growth of my books and my platform. When I first learned about the publishing industry, I wrote my first book, I learned about the publishing industry, and this was around 2007 when the iPhone came out, when the Amazon Kindle launched, and when the very beginning of, we didn't really even call it podcasting back then. It was sort of, do you remember? It was like downloadable audio. And and I used to put a tape deck in my car in the tape and then plug it into a downloadable audio device. I mean, that's how we used to listen to the early podcast. And so I started podcasting in 2009, partly because I just did not know how to sell my own books. And I set up my own publishing company. I still run my own publishing company because I'm an entrepreneur like yourself. And I wanted to make a living. I wanted to leave my job as an IT consultant and become an author. And to do that, I really thought I need to set up a business for my books. And I need to learn how to do internet marketing and how to sell books on the iPhone and the Kindle, which was that nascent technology. So I kind of jumped on things that early. And of course, so much has changed along the way.
So tell me about how you were able to make the jump. You did create your company, but you had to go from, 1 week you were getting a salary from a company and then 1 week you weren't, right? And you had to sell your books. And did you do it gradually and do a side hustle? And once you got to enough revenue, you jumped? Or how did you make it possible to make that jump from full-time employee to full-time author entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was an IT contractor, so I ran my own IT business. Before that, I ran a scuba diving business. I've run quite a lot of businesses, started and run them. So I always had that business mindset. But when I decided to become an author, I was never going to be a poor author in a garret. I was always going to make decent money. So I decided to do that side hustle thing. So between sort of 2006-07 to 2011, so 5 years pretty much, I wrote in the morning. So before work, 5 a.m., I would get up, I would write. And then in the evening, I was living in Australia at the time, so I could talk to a lot of Americans with that time shift. And I was doing the podcast. I was learning how to do platform building. That was the early days of Twitter, social media, Facebook, all of that. So it was sort of create in the morning, marketing in the evening, build the platform slowly. So over 5 years, I then went to 4 days a week. So that's a good tip for people. If you give up 20% of your income in order to have more time. And in those 5 years, I was able to build up that side hustle amount of money. And then I said to my husband, if I just have a bit longer to work on this and I wasn't exhausted from my day job, then I could make this work. I know I could. And so we did downsize. We got rid of our debt. We sold pretty much everything. We moved into a smaller house. And I was like, right, I'm going to make this work. But if I can't make it work, I will go back to my job. So that was in 2011 and I never did. And I also surpassed my income in 2015 and now make far more than I did back in the day job days. So it can certainly be done. But as you say, it is not decide to write a book one day and then or start a podcast one day and then the next day, ta-da, you're fine.
Yeah, I love this concept about downsizing. You reduced the requirements that you needed so that you could start growing this new future. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced in that startup process of this transition to become an author?
Well, I think a bit like podcasting, it is finding an audience. I mean, in my early days of podcasting, there were hardly any listeners. And some days you're like, what is the point of doing this? And the same with books, especially if you're an independent author like I am. So I was publishing my own books and the sales were very, very small. My very first payment from Amazon was $1.67. Like that was it. And I was at that point, it's very hard to see how you can get to a point of making a living. But writing, learning the craft, I don't write every day, but I certainly write every week and sort of adding pages to the next book, working on the next book, learning more, putting the books out there, creating an email list. That's another big tip, obviously. But realistically, it's just a very slow process. And the challenge of selling, reaching readers is hard. I also think that many artists, and I have my artist brain and I have my entrepreneur brain, and my artist brain, like many others, does not want to do anything like sales. It is not interested in marketing. It just wants to do cool, creative things. But as we all know, if you want to make a living this way, you do have to think about reaching readers or reaching listeners and multiple streams of income and how you're actually going to bring in money. Otherwise, it is just a hobby, which is fine. We should say it's fine if your hobby is writing or podcasting. But if you want to make it your full-time living, you have to set it up differently.
What are some of the most important things that a podcaster or an author needs to do to set it up differently so that it can be a business and not just a hobby?
Very first thing is to think about your audience. Who do you want to attract with your audience? And a bit like how blogging used to be, some podcasts are kind of all over the place. So the listeners don't know what they're getting. And what you want with a podcast is the repeated experience of coming to the show. So people listening to this, you're part of their repeated experience, but also you have a framework for the show. You have a very clear audience, people who want to podcast or do podcasts. So I'm the same on the Creative Penn podcast. When I started in 2009, I was a new writer, and all I've done for 14 plus years is share the journey of my life as a writer and then interviewing other people who are also writers, authors. And so and I wanted to attract the same people like me who wanted to write books. That's all it's ever been. So if you are the person you're also attracting, that helps. But then in terms of setting it up as a business, you do have to think about the multiple streams of income. So when I started out, I didn't have that. And it got to the point of, I have to make some money with this, or it is just a big time suck. And so that's when I implemented, I had advertisers, so corporate advertisers. I still have them. They're people I work with, companies I work with. So they're all vetted, absolutely. My reputation is super important. But then also I have Patreon. So, people who pay a little bit extra every month in order to get extra content, extra bonus episodes, that kind of thing. Those are my two major ones. And then, of course, marketing my own books, which are my products, marketing courses, affiliate income, that kind of thing. So there's a way to turn a podcast into a moneymaker, but you certainly need that audience first. And that's why you have to think about that at the beginning and then just make sure your show becomes like a habit and people want that repeatable experience. I mean, obviously it's new every week, but it's a repeatable experience.
I love this concept of an author having a Patreon account. What kind of content do you give to your subscribers? Do you give them little extra chapters or little character development vignettes, or what are they willing to pay for?
Well, I have two brands. So I'm Joanna Penn. I write nonfiction for authors, that audience, the same one. And then I have JF Penn, which is my fiction, thrillers, horror, memoir, that kind of thing. So my Patreon is for Joanna Penn. So I am sharing an extra Q&A audio every month where I answer questions. So that it's full of writers, and I answer questions on writing craft, business, publishing, marketing, AI, which is obviously a big topic right now for creators. I also do articles. So this week I had an article on, 7 mistakes that authors make with money. So that's like bonus content that just goes into my Patreon. I do extra videos. I do office hours, live office hours, where I answer questions, do demos of tools and that kind of thing. So it depends, again, who you're designing it for. And I have friends with fiction who do share chapters from books, or a book a month, or a short story a month. So there's lots of things you can do. It's a subscription model, I guess. But I never wanted to do that with the whole podcast. Some podcasters now put up a snippet, like 10 minutes, and they say you have to subscribe to get the whole episode. So the main show is free. You listen on any platform, and then there's extra content behind the subscription. But it's less than a coffee a month. Like the price of a coffee at Starbucks, it's less than that.
Okay, and with this strategy, you were able to get your show to 10 million downloads. What are the most important things that podcasters need to know to grow their shows to that spot? What did you do to reach that amount of downloads?
Well, one is be first in a niche. So, I started, my podcast was started about writing, but also self-publishing at a time when self-publishing was considered vanity press, when it was considered crappy and terrible and a bad thing to do for your career. And I started at that point. And by the time self-publishing became a viable business move for creatives, which was around 2014, I had so much content and so much SEO around that. And I always did transcripts. So I had transcript SEO before. Now it's easier because everyone has AI audio and transcription, and but back then I was paying for transcription in order to get that SEO to my website. I always was an independent podcast host, still pay for hosting. So I think that's important. But basically, that's a big secret. Now, people starting now, obviously you might not be new in a niche. So you need a new angle on a niche. I think that would be the way. Like, it's very hard to beat me in a self-publishing author business niche because I've been just doing it for so long, and the word of mouth and the compounding builds and builds. So I've never advertised the podcast. I've never, put paid ads on it. I've never, I've been on other people's shows, but I've never really done the big growth strategies. It's more being word of mouth and people sharing over time. But I think that's important, is to really think about, well, where do I fit in the niche? How do I become a different voice? And then I think guesting on other people's shows is a really good way, especially if they are similar to yours, but also tangential to yours. So a small group of your audience will be interested in writing a book. So that is a tangential thing to my show. But it's like there are different ways to think about it. So I'm a British woman, and I do powerlifting. So I could pitch myself on a powerlifting show or a women's fitness show, and that would be a different angle for me that, again, some of those people might come across. So if you're a podcaster listening, think about those tangential shows. And a good research tool is perplexity.ai. If people haven't tried Perplexity.
Yeah, that's a great AI tool.
It is fantastic. And, beforehand, like, I was researching you. I was like, tell me about Nathan, tell me about some of what he likes to talk about. And, then it would be find 10 other podcasts like this show that I could pitch. And then, of course, you can then pitch with the different angles.
Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is sponsored by PodUp, the ultimate podcasting platform. As podcasters, we're always looking for ways to simplify our workflows, grow our reach, and make more money. What if I told you that there's a tool that combines more than 35 essential podcasting features into one platform? That's exactly what PodUp offers, and it's transforming how we create, grow, monetize, publish, syndicate, and do so many other things with our podcasting content. From recording and editing to website building and audience engagement, PodUp covers virtually the entire podcasting process. What sets PodUp apart is its focus on growth and monetization. The platform includes AI-powered features that help you save time on tasks like creating short video clips and transcribing episodes. It also offers tools for guest management, content syndication, and email list building, all accessible from one centralized dashboard. For those of you looking to turn your podcast into a revenue stream, PodUp provides integrated monetization tools to help you market products, courses, and services directly to your audience. What's even better is that with PodUp, you don't have to waste time and money switching between multiple softwares to produce your podcast. With PodUp, you get all 35 modules within one fully integrated platform and for a fraction of the cost. If you're interested in simplifying your podcast workflow while expanding your reach and making some money while you're at it, check out podup.com. That's PODUP.com and get a free trial of the software. Now, back to the show. Okay, you wrote a great article called 7 Lessons Learned from more than 10 million downloads on your podcast. Can you take us through those lessons that you've learned over this journey?
Yeah, so just the first one, and I said start where you are, basically. So amusingly, back in 2009, my very first episode, I actually phoned someone up on an actual phone. If people remember what an actual phone is, I don't even have an actual phone anymore. I know, like a landline, one's that's plugged in the wall. And I put it on speakerphone. Remember where there was a button you press it, it was on speakerphone. And then I held a recorder next to the phone. And I still have that episode up, episode 1 from March 2009. And the echo in the room is appalling. The quality is appalling. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. We didn't have all the tools back then, but I got started. And I interviewed, in fact, one of the very top authors in Australia at the time. She came on the show. I put it out there. And then since then, things have changed. You know, we changed microphones, we changed software, you know, we might change host, although I stayed with the same one since then. And your ability will also get better. I mean, you know, with all the interviews you do, some people know what they're doing, other people need to learn, and it just takes time to learn these things. So that would be the first tip, is really don't wait to get started until everything's perfect. Get started and see what happens.
Yeah, that's great advice.
So then I guess the next one is focus on the value for the audience and for your listeners. I know you do great editing on your show. I also do great editing on my show, because it really annoys me as a listener when there's too much padding in podcasts, especially as many of us listen on like 1.5 speed or some people on 2 speed. People want value for their listening time. Now, some shows are more entertainment and some shows are more information, but really it's about what is the most value to your listeners. And that is also how you're going to monetize, because people are not going to say join a subscription or buy your books and products if you're not giving value in the show. The next one is that everyone starts with nothing, no audience, no email list, no downloads, no nothing. And it can take a lot of time. So I think some people start a podcast or write a book and they think, oh, next week I'm going to be famous, or next week I'm going to make $1 million. And as we know, I mean, it can take months, it can take years to build up an audience. So one of my rules is that if a show hasn't had 50 episodes, then it hasn't even settled in yet. What do you think about that?
Yeah, a lot of people say that you just need to set the expectation going in that it's going to take a year. And even that year could vary greatly based on how many episodes you do, based on the quality of episodes you do, the quality of the guests you have on. I've heard someone say if you do twice as many episodes, you'll get there twice as fast as if you just do one a week. But it depends. Some people are definitely a lot better and it goes a lot faster. Some people have a lot of following and start with following, and that helps it go faster. So I guess the underlying point is it takes time. Set your expectation and realize this isn't a get rich quick scheme. This is like a long-term retirement strategy where you're building an asset that has recurring value for you and not just, a flash in the pan type of a scheme. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and that's similar with being an author. Again, people think one book, that's it, I'm done. But, as you said, I've got 40 written, like 3 a year for 15 plus years. And that's the way to build an author career and an author income as well. You have to build the assets, build the intellectual property. But another tip is that people do return for you, the host. And this is something I didn't really learn for a couple of years. So I used to just say, hello, everyone, I'm interviewing today. But then someone emailed me and said, well, what about your journey? Tell us more about you. Tell us the stories about your writing problems and all that. So since then, I've been doing an introduction to the show. And in there, I talk about what I'm doing, and I talk about some of the publishing news, things going on. And a lot of people now return for that segment, even if they're not interested in the interview. So this is a big tip, is that people are coming back day after day or week after week for your voice and what you ask of your interview guest, but they want an insight into your life. And this is just the reality of the way media is now. You know, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Seth Godin, marketing guru, says that, and many other people. But you do have to bring yourself into your show. If you're not very personal, then people can go get that elsewhere. People can get information from Perplexity or ChatGPT. What they can't get is emotion and connection with another person. And I think that also comes through into one of the reasons to do podcasting, which is the relationship with other people. So some of my best friends now are people I met as an early author when I didn't know anyone. And I was like, how am I going to make some friends? I'm quite lonely as an author. And so I decided to start podcasting so I could get people to talk to me. And I'm an introvert. Many authors are introverts. And so it was like, I'm not going to go to events. I'm not going to do all that. Also, I was in Australia. I wanted to talk to Americans. So basically, podcasting is a great way to spend a bit more time with someone, get an insight into their life. You know, we're recording on Halloween and you're wearing a special jersey and I can see that, and I can see your house, and you can see my house, and there's a relationship formed just by talking with someone that doesn't happen if it's just email or some social media following. So those are another two tips.
Going back to your point about the value, I've been thinking about that, and a lot of times we think that when we give away something for free, that people don't have to pay anything for it, right? We give away a podcast, they can listen for free. And so it's really easy to get people to listen to it. But what we're not taking into account there is that people are paying with their time, right? If we have a 30-minute episode, people are trading 30 minutes of their life in exchange for listening for that episode. And we need to be giving them far more than 30 minutes worth of value, of what 30 minutes of their life is worth when they listen to that episode, or they won't listen to another episode. And I love your point about just packing it with as much value as you possibly can.
Yeah, and you can give away the farm on your podcast and people still want more. I mean, my show, I interview authors about their books and my books, and people, you can tell them all the top tips in your book and they will still want the book. Book buyers love books. That's what we do. Also, like, nice. I narrate my own audiobooks. Many podcasters also narrate their own audiobooks. And this is a really good way to kind of move from the free to the paid. If people are listeners, I mean, even now on Spotify and Audible, you can just click over. So absolutely, I agree with you. You can just be generous. I think being generous with what you give away, people will still buy from you. This kind of generosity, I think, is the basis of a lot of how many of us make a living online. And by creating more as well, you're almost inspiring people just by creating sometimes, because a lot of people want to do this. They just haven't crossed the chasm of actually doing it yet. So our job is also partly to inspire people with what's possible.
I love that. Inspiring people with what's possible. Any more tips you would like to share about what you learned from your journey to get to 10 million downloads?
Yeah, so we talked about setting it up as a viable business, which was one of my tips. And then also the final one is you will only sustain what is worth it to you over the long term. So I also set up another podcast. It's called Books and Travel, the Books and Travel podcast. And it's all still there on, the backlist is there. But what happened was I could not make it work as a business. It just would not sustain itself. And I loved the interviews. I loved it, but it just wasn't viable for my time. And so I gave up that podcast because although I enjoyed it, it wasn't worth it. Whereas my main show, the Creative Penn podcast, it is worth it to me for so many reasons. One is it is a big part of my business. Two, the relationships I make and the friendships I make and the connections with my audience. So it really is just enmeshed in everything. Plus, it's still fun and I'm still learning. This is another thing. I've kind of thought, if I stop learning, if I get bored with it, I don't want to ask the same thing every time, like some shows do, not your show, obviously, but some shows just ask the same questions to different people, but keeping it fresh. So how do we keep it fresh for ourselves over time? This, I guess another tip is what you name the podcast. So if you name it something too specific, you might outgrow it, which is why I called mine the Creative Penn, surname Penn with a double N, because I could become a painter and it would still work, basically. But all of these things go into making it worth it for you. And that's what you have to do. If you're listening and you haven't started a show yet, or you're wondering what's happening with the show you have, will be worth it about this show for you and for your audience? And will you be able to sustain it long term? Because as we said at the beginning, that is how you make a success of a podcast.
So Joanna, there are many podcasters that want to become authors. They have a voice, and just like they're sharing their voice on a podcast, the book form is another great way to do that. What advice would you share with podcasters who are wanting to become authors?
It will be different whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction, and it will depend on the show you have as to how well you can integrate it. So let's say it's you doing a book called Podcasting Secrets, and we know that is a nonfiction book. It's aimed at the audience of your show, and let's say it's 100 secrets of successful podcasting. Now, that is a good fit for your brand. It's something that you could easily say, this is now launching. You can get, special course that goes with it. So this is the first thing I think if you're doing a podcast is the book you're thinking of, does it mesh well with your existing brand and your existing business? If it does, it's kind of super simple because you've probably got a lot of content. So now with easy transcription, Otter.ai, for example, Descript, there are lots of ways you can do AI transcription. You can transcribe your shows. You can find nuggets from things, ideally from yourself because you want to do that, or from other people quoting them, citing those resources. And then you can easily market that on your show. You can do the audiobook yourself. There's obviously some skills involved in all of that, but certainly an easier way to go about it. So for that, it's a case of putting together a table of contents of what you want to cover. And then this is the big tip, setting aside time in your calendar to do the writing and then do the editing. This is, people say, oh yeah, I'm going to write a book, and then they're too busy. But what you have to do for anything is set some time aside, put it in your calendar, turn up for the meeting. You and I turned up for this meeting on time. Turn up for yourself on time as you would with anyone else that you respect. And I think that's where a lot of people fall down when it comes to writing a book. Now, if it's fiction, if it's something completely unrelated, then you can still kind of talk about it on your show as you go through. Let's say you're writing a memoir. You can talk about that over time, get people interested, even set up an early sign-up form or something like that. But those type of things take a lot longer than a sort of a core nonfiction book that will match well with your audience, basically.
Yeah, that's great advice. Joanna, you've provided a lot of value for us today. For our audience members who want to learn more about you and your services and your show, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yes, as this is a podcast, come on over to my podcast, the Creative Penn podcast, PENN. And you can also go to my website, thecreativepenn.com, and find free author blueprints and lots of other things. Or my fiction is at jfpenn.com.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, start with basic equipment. Joanna used a speakerphone setup for her first episodes. Number 2, build diverse revenue through advertising, Patreon, product sales, and more. Number 3, create value-packed content by editing ruthlessly and respecting listener time. Number 4, give your show time to grow. Aim for 50 episodes before evaluating performance. Number 5, invest in SEO early. Transcripts build long-term discoverability. Number 6, share personal experiences alongside interviews to build listener connection. Number 7, dominate a specific niche through specific focused content. Number 8, grow audience through strategic guest appearances on related shows. Number 9, use podcasting to amplify other business ventures like book sales and courses. And finally, number 10, focus on sustainable content creation that justifies your time investment. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Secrets. I wish you success on your show. And if you're looking for a great podcasting platform, I recommend you check out PodUp. We have 50 plus integrated tools that help you create, grow, and monetize your venture. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I wish you success as you create, grow, and monetize your podcast.